And all right, we've still got people rolling in here. And can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Connecting
Okay.
Hopkinton.
All right. So I'm going to start out with a little bit of, actually, sorry, I just want to go to my alternate screen here just so I can. Sorry, making a few adjustments just so I can see people here. All right, so a little bit of background. This is a initiative that the planning board kicked off really back at the end of 2020. And this stemmed from a couple of things. Number one, as we looked at our master plan, we know that sidewalks and trails are of high importance to the town. But on the flip side, I think the last two times we've had sidewalk articles at town meeting, they have not passed. And so it felt like a little bit of contradiction, and that we hear people that want more of this, but there wasn't a willingness to fund it. And so the planning board took on an initiative to, number one, understand the drivers behind what people are looking for in terms of sidewalks and trails. And then secondly, to begin putting together a pedestrian connectivity plan is what we're calling it. And so I just want to preface this with a couple of things. Number one, we are still in the early stages of this. I'd love to say we're moving faster, but all of us, this is our part-time gig. So I just want to preface that by saying that this is still in its early stages. Secondly, the reason we're before everyone tonight is because we really want to seek public input. And, and we've got some other data sources that we'll go through. But I want to just remind folks that I think, and sometimes in the past, we've asked people about where they want sidewalks. And tonight, I'm going to ask us to think a little bit differently. And instead of focusing on where you'd like a sidewalk, we really want to understand why you want a sidewalk or a trail in that location. So that's just a quick little bit of background. Really quick, I acknowledge some folks. I also want to acknowledge Mr. Westerling, another head of our DPW, and really appreciate his time as well. So thanks, John, for joining us. So I have a couple of slides that we're going to go through. I do want this to be interactive and to be discussion based. I'm going to pause periodically and ask for some questions. And but I'm going to ask that we've got I think 5 or 6 slides to go through, and then we've got what I'm hoping will result in some really good discussion, specifically around scenarios and trade-offs. And I think this will be interesting discussion. The reality of it is that I think everyone would like more trails and more sidewalks, but we can't do everything at once. We can't fund everything at once, or maybe for that matter at all. And so that's where we want to understand how people think about this, how and why they might prioritize one versus the other. And I think that's going to be where the bulk of our discussion is for tonight. So I'm just going to go through a couple of quick things. A vision statement for our subgroup. Some key findings from a pedestrian connectivity survey that we fielded in early 2021. We have some preliminary ideas for sidewalk and trail improvements based on input from some of the folks on this call, as well as the connectivity survey. Just want to anchor everyone on a couple of different available funding options. And I think at the crux of all of this, that's probably the biggest challenge is how we're going to pay for things. The scenarios and trade-offs I mentioned, and then we'll have some open discussion. So I think it'll be hopefully maybe 15 minutes or so of me talking, and then I'm going to ask a few questions and really hoping that this group is going to be willing to share their perspective and thoughts as we go through it. I will say that if folks, all right, I'm already seeing some chat rolling in. It's going to be hard for me to respond to the chat and to facilitate things all along. So note that your thoughts will be captured. And also say that if you have a question or comment along the way, by all means, you can use the raise your hand feature. This is meant to be input session, so I don't want people to feel discouraged, or if you have an idea, if you have a question, please speak up. This is one of those sessions where there is no bad question, so we want to hear from you. So from a vision perspective, our goal is to establish Hopkinton as an ideal community for all types of walkers and runners by investing in sidewalks and paths and trails. And I think this is really important, that connect neighborhoods, that provide a mix of safe recreation options, and really overall support our community in getting outdoors. And this is a pretty broad vision. But if you as we have this discussion, just encourage people to think back to these goals of connecting neighborhoods, of providing safe recreation options, and getting people outdoors, and recognize that different people have different ways of doing that. And and I think that's again where we're going to try to use the input from this session to help us zero in on how we can do that best. The survey that we did last year, I was really happy with it. We had a great response rate. We had about 350 people respond, which gives us a reasonably substantial response rate. I'm just going to quickly hit on these findings. This is my only slide, but I think this is really good background information for folks. First and foremost, Hopkinton is a very active community with a broad interest in using trails and sidewalks for a multitude of purposes. And whether that be walking downtown, walking to schools, we had a lot of proponents for fitness. I think overall the engagement or the desire for more options really shine through in the survey. Worth noting that more than 85% of respondents believe that more trails and sidewalks would improve both mental and physical health. No surprise here, but I think that any of us that live around a trail or a sidewalk network in town can acknowledge that in the past 2.5 years, we've probably seen an increase of foot traffic, which is great. I think that's I think that's a function of people acknowledging the benefits that come from getting outdoors. We saw that respondents want to invest in both sidewalks and trails and of various surfaces. And I think this is important. We don't need to be all one or the other. I think it's important to recognize that the best thing we can do is give people options. Some people prefer a single track. Some people prefer a stone dust trail. Some people prefer a paved trail or a sidewalk. We just at the end of the day, I think if we go back to that vision of getting people outdoors, that's a really good, healthy way to look at this. Overall, we saw that respondents had a slight preference for paved surface, but generally desire both paved and use gravel here. Some people prefer the term stone dust, but a mix of surfaces is desirable, and I think that in a lot of ways, the preferred surface is a function of how people intend to use it. This next one I think is really important. Fitness runners and walkers, who were the majority of our respondents. Number one, they want to be on a trail or something away from the street. And I think that's an important insight. Anytime we can move sidewalks or trails off of the road, that's perceived to be a benefit for those fitness runners and walkers. The other thing is that in general, they like the idea of loops. That's a theme that you'll see come through with us. I think it's really interesting. I remember in past town meeting articles, I remember thinking of sidewalks and saying, oh, well, there's, 6 houses in front of that. So does that mean that 6 people are going to benefit from having that sidewalk? And the reality of it is that if that sidewalk completes a loop, then there is a much, much more substantial volume of people that will benefit from that. And so, if you think about anybody on this call that walks or runs, I think most of us would prefer a loop to an out and back. And that idea of 2 to 4 miles can be used in a lot of different combinations, regardless of the distance you want to go. In different ways to give people options to get outdoors. And then the last piece here, respondents anticipate traveling more than 1 mile to visit businesses and or walk to school. And I thought this was interesting. I think going in, I had the perception that people really didn't want to walk very far. And what we saw in the survey was that people were actually willing to walk much further than expected, particularly if it was for, the less frequent visit, but if they wanted to go to a restaurant or go get coffee or ice cream or go down to CVS or something like that. So, I think that's a good sign for us as a community. As a subgroup, we came up with a couple of recommendations. The first was to focus on trail loops or loops of any kind, somewhere between that 2 to 4, 2 to 5 mile range, with really any combination of surfaces, and that's just responding to the majority of the respondents. We do think there's a benefit to investing in paved infrastructure, in particular that stems out from downtown and around the schools. We saw that people that want to walk to school or walk to downtown, that's where they had a slight preference for pavement. We recommend that trails should have a varied surface based on location and anticipated use. And again, recognizing different people have different preferences. And then the last piece here was some opportunity to improve safety features, in particular on highly traveled roads. And that could be whether it be visibility improvements or trimming back trees and shrubs or things that can improve sightlines. So I'm going to pause there, and I guess for my colleagues, feel free to chime in if there's anything that I've missed here, and I also want to, before we move on to the next topic, I want to just kind of check in with the group and see if people have questions or comments about what we've shared thus far.
Yeah, I have a quick question. I got a little one here in the tub too, so if you hear some noises, I apologize for folks. I new to the town. I see a lot of emphasis on recreation and jogging and running. Is the consideration of walking also including families with children and strollering and that group too?
Yes, absolutely. And Joe, I think just to reinforce that point, I think that to some degree that's where, I'm not going to speak for everybody, but strollers in particular, depending on the type of stroller you have, there could be some benefit to pavement. I know there's also, I think people would speak to a lot of benefits for kids on trails and single track. So, but by all means, we are a very family focused community, and certainly not just in terms of getting kids and families outdoors, but keeping them safe as well.
Nice. Yeah, that's great. I live on Ash Street, down by arenas, and I know me and some of the neighbors with families think about accessibility and connection up to Blueberry Lane or access to the common. Some thoughts we had.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe. Any other questions or comments before we move on?
Yeah, I'd like to speak for a minute.
Go ahead, Kathy.
Hi, I live at Indian Brook Condominiums, so off of Elm Street, and I've been walking around this town for more than 50 years, running and biking, and so I really appreciate how many sidewalks and trails that we have, and many of my friends who go south for the winter say they can't stand to be inside all winter long. And I realized that because our town does such a good job of clearing the sidewalks, I'm never stuck inside, except on the very iciest, right after a storm maybe, but I really appreciate that. In terms of safety, I wish on Elm Street there could be a speed limit. There's a lot of traffic. I understand it. It's a great cutoff for people, and I don't care. The streets are meant for that. But they really fly down there, and the street is very narrow, and the sidewalks, they're big trucks going right by. Sometimes I'm afraid I'm going to get hit by a mirror on the truck. But, and the other thing for safety, I saw somebody crossing up by what used to be the Congregational Church by the Common. And I stopped for them. It was a family with a stroller, and some impatient person behind me zoomed around me and almost killed that whole family. The other thing I found that people do not stop, including a couple of times a cruiser has gone by when I'm standing at a crosswalk. And it makes it difficult that people just don't stop. And I wish that that could be enforced. So I just wanted to say how much I appreciate all that you do and all that the town offers. And I'm going to keep walking. So thank you.
Mr.
Thanks,
Chairman,
Kathy.
if I could reply.
Oh, go ahead, John.
Sorry. Kathy, thank you very much for your kind words. Your DPW takes great pride in the work that we do, especially with snow removal, to keep the sidewalks safe and passable for pedestrians, students, residents, everyone. So I truly appreciate your comments. With regard to the speed limit, the only way to lower a speed limit is through a process with Massachusetts Department of Transportation. It requires an engineering study. It requires Mass DOT's approval. So it's a lengthy process, and I'm not sure that the way that the process is run, that we would be able to lower the speed limits there. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing is I appreciate your concern about Main Street, especially in front of the Common. It's extremely wide, the pavement width. But you'll see right after the marathon, Amarillo Construction will begin their work of reconstructing that segment of Main Street. And the pavement width there will be greatly reduced. Traffic will be better channelized, and pedestrians will find it much safer to be walking there on the sidewalks and crossing the street.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for that. And just one other question about the speed limit. Elm Street's pretty heavily settled. I don't really know what the speed limit is, but maybe just whatever it is, if it was posted and enforced, because I'm pretty sure the speed limit isn't 45 and 50.
You can rest assured that it's not 45 or 50. I don't know what it is. We can ask the police chief what the speed limit is there. It's a residential, thickly settled area. And we will find out what the process is, if there is a process of us posting that speed.
Through the chair.
Yes, go ahead, Jane.
It should be 30 to 35 miles per hour. And I think that's the thing that's frustrating for folks is that the posted speed limit is only posted at the beginning of the road and at the end of the road. So often when you're traveling through, you think, well, where's the speed limit sign? Well, you might have passed it and was 2 seconds behind, but that's just the way warning signs and speed limit signs are posted in cities and towns around here.
Well, I can speak for Elm Street because I walk on it all the time, and it's not at the beginning. The only thing that's posted is right at Elmwood School. But other than that, and it's 20 when
it could be that we could look into that.
I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm crafting an email to the police chief right now.
Thanks, John.
You're welcome.
I will say, I think we're going to hear a common theme here with regards to safety and speed of vehicles. And a couple of thoughts. Number one, I have found our police department to be incredibly responsive. If there is a problem point or if there's a situation where people are consistently violating the speed limit. And so it doesn't solve all of our problems, and it certainly, but I applaud them for their efforts. I think the other thing to keep in mind is that most streets in Hopkinton have speeders, and most streets in Hopkinton have some inherent risk for pedestrians. And, whether it be Front Street, Ash Street, Pond Street, Fruit Street, that's one of the hardest things about this is logistically, we're not going to get sidewalks everywhere. And that's really, I think, where it comes back to the crux of what we're trying to flush out here is, where should we focus first, and where can we get the most value out of making some improvements. The second point that I'd make is that I think that, I'll tell you, I live not too far off of Hayden Row, and when my kids were little, even walking along Hayden Row on the sidewalk felt dangerous. To your point, Kathy, sometimes it felt like a mirror was going to take us out, or my daughter was going to accidentally pedal off the sidewalk. And I think that's where anytime we can have some natural barrier between a trail or a sidewalk and the street, it's a massive safety improvement for us, and easier said than done. We have right-of-way issues, we have wetland issues, we have all sorts of complexities, but I think that's part of the rationale for why any chance we can, we want to move those pedestrian passageways off of the street. I see Sam has their hand raised.
Yes, and I am not any of those people in the picture. So somehow, no matter what I do to change this, my wife has her own Zoom account. Every time I log in to somebody else's Zoom, it shows a picture from my wife's account. So I'll have to figure out how to solve that one of these days. And I'll put my video on as soon as I finish my supper. But I'm on the Council on Aging board in town. And so I really liked your vision statement where you talked about all types of walkers. So I just wanted to bring everyone's attention to consider the needs of senior walkers, or people who walk because they have some type of cognitive impairment and they have a caregiver with them.
Good.
And one thing that's important for seniors and people with limited mobility, or people who have some type of cognitive impairment, some form of dementia, who are out with their caregivers, is they need benches placed regularly so they can rest. So they may not go out for a 2 to 5 mile loop. They may go out for a half mile or whatever, but they need places to rest. And that should be an important consideration when you think through your final plans, to take them into account, because they're a member of our community, and they like to be outside too, and they do have some needs, special needs that need to be accommodated.
Yeah, that's great.
Sam,
Thanks, Sam.
Sam, what's a good distance between benches for that population?
Oh, it's a great question. We do have access to a study that's called Physical Infrastructure Design for people with dementia, and I'll have to go reference that. So I don't really have a good comment on how far the benches should be, but I can find that. And who should I send that to?
Send it to Gary.
Okay, great. I will do that.
All right. Thanks, Sam. Rhea.
Hi there, Gary. Me again. We're meeting every night now.
Seems like it.
Gary, thank you so much for your service. It takes a lot of time to get anything like this done. I want to emphasize safety over recreation, however, in this particular time in our town, because when I moved here in 2004, I live on 39 Oakhurst at the lake. We didn't have the population we have right now. In fact, we didn't have a grocery store in our neighborhood. We basically had a lot fewer cars on the road than we do now. And I see West Main Street as a highway, 45 mile per hour speed limit. And a lot of people coming from outside of the town using our roads system. Now, I live 9/10 of a mile away from that Price Chopper, and my son was the youngest kid they ever hired, and he could not ride his bicycle to that space, to that location. It was too unsafe. And I see a lot of infrastructure improvements being done across the town, except for this side and, the people around our neighborhood who are getting more populated every day. I can't walk to town. I just came back from being in California for 2 months without a car. I was fit, I'm tan, I'm happy, and I'm now not able to leave my neighborhood because out of sheer fear of being hit by somebody on West Main Street. And I'm just hoping that we could make some kind of a priority for safety on this sidewalk situation, because I know we funded sidewalk cleaners what was it, 2 years ago? It's a blur now, but then we didn't fund the sidewalks. So I'm kind of like waiting for something to happen. So this is why I'm here tonight, because I really want to emphasize access both to Sandy Beach, which has limited parking, and to Peppercorn, which has limited parking, by a sidewalk that allows people to, walk around or ride their bike around. I can't get past 495. In Milford, the ramps have stop signs. In Hopkinton, there's a yield, and people don't yield. It's just, they just keep going. And it's a huge safety issue. And I know it's Mass DOT, but I don't really care. It's like it's affecting the whole west side of the town, has to be in a car. And if you've ever been on West Main Street at like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, you see what happens. Many of those people aren't even from our town. They're just getting off the highway and they're just heading west. So I know the majority of our budget goes to funding the schools, and the schools are great, and the schools are fighting for their dollars right now because they've been in, there's a whole lot of new kids and we have new population. But I want to see some social equity in this process. It's not just got to be all downtown. It's not going to be just Hayden Row. It's not going to be just, connecting the bike trail. I'm an avid cyclist. I go to Rhode Island to cycle. I brought my bicycle to California to cycle. I walk all the time. I can't walk anywhere except for my neighborhood. I can't go anywhere here. Yeah. It's very frustrating. I wanted to say something else here. I just renewed my sustainable credential through LEAD. I've been doing LEAD since 2011. I really focus on community planning in my education process. And I just feel like if we could somehow get some safety measure from my neighborhood past 495, it's going to help a lot of people. We don't need to get in a car to go to the store. We don't need, I see you live in Chamberlain Street. There's a great neighborhood. I'm never going to casually meet you in a town, Gary. We're going to have to make a meeting, and I'm going to have to drive to see you.
Yeah. Rhea, so I agree with you. A couple of quick things. I think that's why we've embarked on this journey in this project, and I think that number one, if we care about this stuff, we have to find ways to fund it. Number two, specifically to Main Street and 495, we've actually already started conversations with MassDOT to, at least on a preliminary basis, to see what types of options might be there. But we're going to talk more about that specifically in a little bit. But to your point of not just downtown, not just the bike trail, yes, and yes. Hang tight. We're going to get into some scenarios here, and I think that we're going to have some great discussion, because the one theme that I want to continue to remind people is we're not going to have sidewalks everywhere. We've got to figure out where to invest first. And that's probably the best way to describe it. And but I just, I think anybody on this call could probably identify a street very near to them that doesn't feel safe, that they don't walk on. And so I just, hang tight. We're going to get through some of this discussion. I hear you, Rhea. I agree. I think that 495 is a
huge barrier.
It's a massive barrier.
Huge barrier.
Agreed.
And the town has been growing massively on the west side as well as on the east side. So it's like I wanted to be on this call tonight to point out the inequity and the amount of money that's been spent in connectivity in the center of town and the east side of town, maybe because the large development was there. And I just want to see some of that love come my way.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to keep moving a little bit. We're going to have a lot more discussion here. I have just a couple more slides, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time here, but I do want to point out, this is not an exhaustive list, but we actually have, I think people are sometimes surprised at the number of sidewalks we do have and the number of trails that we have. And so, like I said, this is not an exhaustive list. but hopefully it gives you a little bit of perspective. This next one, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it, but I just want to point out these are some preliminary sidewalks and trails that we have identified. And I think, Rhea, to your point, you'll see that we are looking across the town. I think what you'll see here is some emphasis on what we consider to be town resources, whether it be neighborhoods or lakes or parks. This is not in any kind of priority order, so don't take this to mean that A is a priority over B and C and whatnot. This was just meant as sort of conceptual. Here's a lot of things that we're considering. But I'd also say if we were to try to do all of these, I can't begin to estimate as to how much that would cost, but it would be tens of millions of dollars. And so I think that's really, really important for us to anchor on that there is a need for all of these and more. But it's just feasibility wise, we're not going to be able to do that. So we'll get back to this in a little bit. I'm eager to get to some of these scenarios. Speaking of funding, there are different ways we can fund this. Town meeting is one of them, and we have 2 sidewalks that are going to be for us at town meeting this year. CPC can be used in some cases, but to my understanding, not for sidewalks, but for trails. There is some application of CPC funding. State and federal grants. And, I think that we're cautiously hopeful that potentially some of those bigger projects, whether it be crossing 495 or getting safer access to the train station in Southborough, that we might be able to pull in some grant money for that. Private development as the planning board, we are always trying to get developers when they build something to incorporate sidewalks as part of our bylaws that they need to. And sometimes it seems a little counterintuitive. Everyone says, well, there's no sidewalk on either side, so why would we put a sidewalk on that parcel? Well, we don't start somewhere that it never gets built. But through development, there's an opportunity. And the last piece is donations. And I see Chuck and Peter and some people from our other committees and boards, and we certainly have a reasonable number of property in town that's donated, whether it be as part of an open space subdivision or part of solar or that sort of thing, and that's another means of improving connectivity. This is conceptual in nature, but part of our goal is to build out a multi-year plan. I think we don't have funding sources for all of this, so some of this is going to be done in parallel. We want to be adaptable in the future, but I also think it's worth noting, while we're still building out this plan, we did put forth 2 sidewalk articles for town meeting coming up in May, and those are on Chestnut from Wild down to Smith. That provides access to one of our larger neighborhoods in Hopkinton, and it also connects into the existing infrastructure. The second is a sidewalk from EMC Park to Blueberry, which from that looping concept, it's relatively short, but it creates a lot of options for folks. So we chose those 2 just as a starting point. We felt that there was a pretty clear case for them and a lot of people that would benefit from it. But our hope is that over the next 6 months or so, we can fill out this chart to have some specific recommendations and priorities over the next 4 or 5 years. So again, I'm going to pause and see if folks have questions or comments.
Hi, Gary. It's Amy.
Hi, Amy.
I just wanted to mention, I know we've had some discussion at the select board with the budget being so tight this year about those town meeting articles, if we should try to fund them with grants and if they might be eligible for the federal infrastructure bill. We talked to McGovern about that a little bit. So they are on the warrant, but we were debating because the budget is so high this year, whether we should look for an alternate funding source.
I think we're always looking for alternate funding sources. I think it's a great point. I will say that the ones that we have this year, the EMC to Blueberry was a part of that request to our state and federal group. The Chestnut sidewalk was not on it, so doesn't mean that can't change in the future. But by all means, as you know, Amy, our budget pressure is not going to lighten in the coming years. And so we have to continue to be creative. We also have some new grant writing capacity at Town Hall that we're hopeful can help identify some funding sources as well. But, I think another great example for a potential grant is with all the pressure on MBTA communities, with Hopkinton having a MBTA station on our northern border, if the state really wants to encourage people to use more mass transit, and I think there's a really, really easy place to invest there in terms of providing better access to that train station. So I think there's probably some locations that are probably well suited to pursuing outside funding. Chuck?
Thank you to the chair. I'd just like to note that one, thanks for your focusing on these needs, but there are, in terms of talking about funding, there are 3 parcels up for potential funding with CPA or CPC funds this spring for acquisition of Anstar or Eversource parcels in the so-called Berry Acres area. If those were acquired, it would then allow improvements of trails there, which would link from the school campus areas, Loop Road, through Chamberlain Extension, to the apartments or West Main and Lumber Street, and also even provide easier access from the Charlesview area to those areas. So I think when you're talking connectivity, those are areas where acquisition of those parcels could allow for permanent trail improvements that would really benefit a significant area of the town near the center.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. I do want to take a moment and just read some of the comments that people have posted in the chat, if anybody hasn't seen it. The first is from Nate Oram. Holt Street is a necessary connection to the schools. It's also a fairly dangerous street given the curve and how fast people drive down the hill. This is pertinent for keeping children safe as they walk to school. There is a sidewalk all the way down Ash to Blueberry, but no connector to the schools. I'd love to be able to walk to Price Chopper and South Street from Elm Street as well. I live in Valleywood off of Pond Street. I agree with Rhea 100%. I'd love to be able to cross Main Street without dying. 495 is a total barrier to walkers and bikers who live east of 495. Thank you, Rhea. Rhea, I think Legacy Farms Builder had to pay for a sidewalk to connect their neighborhood to the existing sidewalk on East Main Street. Yes, I believe that's true as well. So appreciate those folks that have chimed in with their comments. So as we move to the next phase here, and we're going to go through some scenarios, I'm going to ask people as best they can to, again, think about the why they have a preference of one versus the other. And I'm also going to encourage people to think about this not through the lens of their personal situation, but the broader community. And I don't want this to turn into I need a sidewalk in my neighborhood, and that's more important than someone else's neighborhood. And it's hard to kind of decouple those things, but that's where we're hopeful that the focus on the why will really help a dialogue here that can help us make some decisions. Ria, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks again, Gary. I live in the land of retail development, and traffic numbers should give us a priority of where these sidewalks need to be, meaning the number of cars during peak times during the day when people are out and about, when it is really unsafe to try to walk on the road. Traffic numbers and safety need to trump this recreational need for sidewalks, trails. We have yet to finish the west side of the town at the same level as the east side of the town. And yes, I understand that Legacy Farms did have to put in some sidewalks, but they also built so many houses and so many people live there. They were hoping to prevent people from getting into their cars every time they left the site. Here, we don't have big plots of land where we have a developer who can do that. There's nothing like that. Everyone is trying to build on the lake right now. It is incredibly intense how many, sites are being turned over and how many people are enjoying the lake. I just feel like traffic and safety should be the priority. And if you look at the traffic numbers of West Main Street, it trumps all of the traffic everywhere else in town. There's no other road as busy as West Main Street. I can see it.
So Ria, I do want to clarify. To me, safety and recreation aren't two different things. It doesn't matter what people are out for. If they are out walking, they need to feel safe.
Yep.
And whether that be because they're walking to the grocery store, or they're walking to school, or they're walking to get coffee, or they're walking for recreation. I agree with you. Safety is first and foremost. So I don't want to, I'm hopeful that it didn't come across as that recreation trumps safety, because if people aren't safe, then it doesn't matter.
Right. Well, I saw in your diagram that maybe Pond Street would be a consideration, and Pond Street is a very, very pretty road. And I do see people occasionally bomb down it. It does not have the traffic numbers. It does not have the density that we have. And so I know that the lake people have always been sort of second-class citizens in this town. And I'm not saying that that's the case today, but I'm just saying it's like, okay, now we really need to make sure that, there's an equitable, inclusionary, process here, getting people who are in this dense population to be able to walk 9/10 of a mile to the grocery store.
Yeah.
It's really basic, but it has to do, I think, prioritizing traffic numbers over, it would be nice to be able to meander along a pretty scenic road. It's two different things. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I curious though, if I think of Main Street from Lumber up to Wood Street, that also is a heavily trafficked piece of road. There is a sidewalk there, but yet the pedestrian traffic is much less there than it is elsewhere. And I'm not denying that's needed for safety's sake, but I would argue that, to some degree, we can't just base it on traffic numbers, because, we also want to be building and investing in assets that are going to be used by people. So I think that Price Choppers are a great example. There's a very clear need. And you look at the entire apartment community behind over by the Spoon, and wouldn't it be great if everyone that lives there could walk to the grocery store, ride a bicycle to the grocery store? I agree with you, but I'd caution about just basing this off of traffic. And the other reason I'd caution that is because we're also not just talking about sidewalks, but if we can do a trail, in so many ways, that's the safest option of all. So I think it's a consideration, but I wouldn't want to base this just off of vehicular traffic numbers.
But that's the reason why people are in their cars, though, Gary, is because there is no other option.
Yeah.
saying there are other options. There are other options for people, who live in the apartment complex. They can walk into town. They can walk, I'm just saying it is the reason why there's so much vehicular traffic is because there is no option to ride your bicycle. There is no option for me to walk to Chamberlain Street to say hello to you. That's just not an option. It's not safe.
Yeah. So
Jerry.
let's get it. Oh, go ahead, Peter.
I was going to say to Rhea's point, I think she raises a good point, which is, living towards the center of town, I tend to think of walking to Price Chopper as an issue that 495 is a barrier to. And I think 495 is a huge barrier. Having said that, we should probably think about, for your group, looking at walking from the lake. Now, Downey Street, I'm not sure there's room for a sidewalk on Downey Street.
No.
So then the question becomes Hayward, which when I drive down Hayward, I oftentimes see people walking, and they're out in the middle of the road because they kind of have to be. But I think there may be room for a sidewalk. So I think there are perhaps some things that can be done to alleviate this issue. While we wait, to Amy's point, I think you have to, the 495 is a DOT big money option, but there may be some smaller sidewalks that could help in that lake situation and allow people to get the Price Chopper. I know, having looked at it from the side of the buildings up along South Street, on the east side there, I think there's room for a trail that would kind of run behind the buildings there that would be perhaps a loop for walkers, but would allow the workers in that area to get to Price Chopper. And again, I think those are things we probably ought to be looking at.
Yeah, great points. And thank you for Rhea for comments. And I agree with you. I think that's one reason that, case in point, we had, even as a preliminary option, we had talked about, you'll see here, both along Main Street, which I think is the area you're referring to, all the way to Downey, and then on Hayward Street from South Street down to Sandy Beach. So I think these are definitely in consideration.
But we also have like 100 homes on Oakhurst and Scarlotta and Deneen that were built out in the last 10 years. And all the communities, the neighborhoods across the street from us, from West Main Street, it is this section of road on West Main Street that goes the Causeway. There's no safe place to walk.
Yeah. Okay. Duly noted, and I think we can definitely, it's you make really good points.
Through the chair.
Yes, Jane.
So we've been, at least I have been talking about doing that 495, under 495 connection and Price Chopper, sidewalk in front of Price Chopper since the building plan went into with the planning board. So it's been talked about for a long time, and I recognize the need, Rhea. I think the elephant in the room is if we were to put sidewalks in those areas, which we can do if the town voted to do it, would be some eminent domain issues. And that's always a touchy subject for a lot of people. Putting the sidewalk under 495 is doable. Southborough's done it, Westborough's done it, a lot of towns have done it, but it does take DOT money. But however, and we've talked about this in the planning board, if we have a master plan and we've written it down and we have these inclusionary items in this master plan, then we have an option whereby we can go forward to apply for this grant money. It's going to take a community, Rhea. It's going to take a lot of folks coming together to say, okay, priorities, we want connectivity, we want safe passages. I think a major one is Price Chopper and under the 495 bridge. So this is an important discussion.
Thank
All
you.
right, I'm going to move on to our first scenario here, which is a great lead in, and this is going to probably feel a little controversial. But what I want people to do is to think about a couple of different options here. And I want to have some discussion about why we might prioritize one over the other. So this is just fictitious. We're not having to make a decision here. But segment A, as it's outlined, would be to connect downtown to the Southborough train station via what we're calling a shared use path. So it's something that could be used by bicycle, by walkers, runners, and it's a little bit different than a sidewalk in that it's potentially off of the side of the road a little bit and is wider to allow for multiple uses. Option B would be a sidewalk on Main Street from Lumber to downtown. So that's crossing 495 and it goes to beyond Price Chopper. I see the question, how many miles is it from CVS to the train station? It's a good question, Ria.
3?
Yeah, I was going to say about 2.5 miles or so.
Somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Not longer than that.
So again, Ria, I guess I see your comment. I would prioritize traffic and safety as a need over recreation. I think both of those are safety issues. Both of those are high traffic, high speed streets. I think both have major safety implications. So I guess I'm curious as to how you're applying that lens of safety over recreation in this consideration.
More of a general statement, Gary. I just wanted to have it in the record of the chat. I know that this new guidance by the state that we have housing near the train station is going to be something that's going to come up. I would think that the restaurant site there, that's 4 acres of land, that would be an ideal redevelopment site, and sidewalks from that project to the train station would make some sense. Okay, the issue when you get a sidewalk going all the way up the hill to the CVS is the same issue we have with the West Main Street hill. It is a very, very high slope. I'm not saying that correctly, but
Steep grade.
Yeah, steep grade, to say this at least, and to do a sidewalk up a steep grade and not make it look like San Francisco. I don't know how it's done. So the sidewalk from Main Street from Lumber down to Downey is it is a key area, and it would help people get to that grocery store for sure. So,
thanks, Ria. Thoughts from other folks? If you had to choose one or the other, why might you choose option 1 or option 2? Jane.
I would choose segment B, sidewalk from Main Street to Lumber Street to Downey, just beyond the Price Chopper, for the simple reason that the Upper Charles Trail Committee is currently putting in for funding for a engineering to go from East Main Street through Legacy Farms to the Hopkinton State Park, which would get us to the train station. So that is an option. It might not be the best option, but it's at least one highly possible option that's probably going to take place. Where segment B, the sidewalk from Main to Lumber to Downey, we don't have anything right there. And I think that could be something that we would look at as an alternative priority, because there is no other plan.
Sam.
And one other, Ria mentioned using traffic flow data to try to make decisions. One other option to that would be to look at potential users. So with option segment A, how many people potentially could use a shared use path from CVS to the train station versus how many people would use the option B, option 2, segment B, a sidewalk on Main Street. Shared use pass sounds good, but who would use it? Would it be people trying to get to the train station, walking to the train in the morning, riding their bikes? So maybe potential users is another criteria to try to make a decision.
Thanks, Sam. I agree with you. I like using that as a gauge. Ken. Ken, you're muted.
Yeah, I was going to chat, but so I don't like section A as a sidewalk option because I don't think, there's hardly any houses there. There's, I guess there are a few houses near the park, and there are certainly houses at the top of the hill that can walk around downtown, but that hunk of 85 there is like the biggest hunk of highway we've got in town that has hardly any residences along it, and therefore I think it would be a poor choice to spend a lot of money putting a sidewalk there. I'm in favor of the connectivity that Jane spoke about. So the Upper Charles Trail is going to be connecting through the other side of the lake, and there's also potential for adding more hiking trails through Hopkinton State Park that would take some of the walking pressure off the part of 85 that's right next to the reservoir. For example, there could be a trail through the woods up there, which would require DCR approval, of course, since it's their lane. But I think that could take some walking pressure off. But placing a sidewalk there, I don't think is going to serve very many people.
Yeah.
I think Ria's idea going under 495, I think that would serve a lot more people.
You know, my only challenge to you on that, Ken, is that again, it's not so much the people that live along the pathway or the sidewalk. It's all the people that live in the downtown area that might want to get to the train station by means other than driving. So again, I think going back to Sam's point about potential users is probably a good way to look at it.
Yeah.
But and I don't mean to say it sounds like in general people in these options like the idea, feel that option 2 is a little bit more feasible, probably has more value to the town. That's what I'm hearing. And
Yes.
Has some likely higher number of users than option A. That's kind of what I'm hearing. But I just be cautious about looking at the number of people that live along it, because nobody lives along segment B either. So the idea is connecting two important destinations more than it is the number of people that live along it. Mr. Westerling.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to express, as everyone else has, my thanks to you and the other folks that are on the screen here that are looking at this very challenging situation that we have and trying to make for safer walking for all of our pedestrians in town. So thank you for that. In this scenario, I would choose segment B. And what I'm looking at is the density of population that we have over on Lumber Street and what the sidewalks from Lumber Street, what they lead to. It leads to downtown, it leads to Wood Street, and its connectivity to the shopping area there and the need for groceries. And when I see folks that currently walk that, I just saw someone today, I cringe in fear because they're up against 2 lanes, in some areas 3 lanes of traffic that are moving at well over 45 miles an hour. And so I look at the need for that connectivity versus the need for people to get to the train station. If you go to the Southborough train station or even the Ashland train station, you don't see a lot of cars in the parking lot anymore because people are working from home. There's a lot more remote working today. So all of those things play into my decision or my option here of segment B. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, John. Peter.
Yep, I would agree on segment B being a priority. The only thing I wanted to add with regard to A is that you wouldn't put the trail down alongside the road as a sidewalk. There's a place to put a shared use path in the woods further to the west of where you show it there. And so the concept is fine as is, but thinking that it's a sidewalk coming up the steep hill is probably not really appropriate.
Yeah. Okay. This was helpful. We've got more of these scenarios to come. But I think hearing the discussion and these are the types of things that we have to flesh out how to prioritize. So I like how this is going so far. So the next scenario we have, the next screen here is and I'm going to let this process for a second, but what we tried to do is, would we rather focus on sidewalks, which I think kind of supports the notion that we've talked to some extent about already about improving safety along our roads, versus this idea of more trail connectors that provide for more extensive loops in various ways. So option one here would be segments, in this case, segments I and F. So I is along Hayden Row here, where there actually already is a sidewalk on one side of the street, but we know with the schools there, anybody that lives nearby, and I'm sure Amy can chime in here, that many people just avoid crossing the street to stay on the sidewalk and walk across yards. Along with segment F, which was an example, would be out on Fruit Street. So providing connectivity from Wood Street out to the Fruit Street trails and fields. Versus option two, which would be some improvements that, like I said, just improve connectivity in some capacity. So segment J, which is this little connector here to Blueberry Lane from EMC Park. L, which would provide connectivity from Ash Street and Center School out to the trail network. And then option M, which would provide connectivity from Legacy North to the trail network by the old Liberty Mutual site. So I think the idea here is again, and I don't want to get too hung up on the specific locations. It's this idea of, do we want to focus specifically on sidewalks that run parallel to roads, or do we want to focus on finding ways to get people away from the street in trails in some capacity? Who's willing to go first?
I will.
Kathy, go ahead.
One thing about trails versus sidewalks is the trails are not as usable in the winter unless you're dressed appropriately. If I have crampons on my hiking boots and stuff, I can use them. But the sidewalks are maintained. And so, like I said, unless it's the worst experience, it's not as accessible for getting around in the winter. And that's a big, except for this winter, it's a big part of our life in New England. So just something I think to consider.
Thanks, Kathy.
So I'm biased in this one because it's right by my house, but I think it is a real problem that downtown between the school campuses and the downtown, there's not a sidewalk on both sides of the streets, and the kids have to cross back and forth or walk on lawns, and the school has not been able to hire crossing guards for years. So I really think that segment to get from the school campus to downtown is really important, but I am biased. I also do really like that connection to the Fruit Street fields, because I believe there is a sidewalk in Woodville, in the Woodville Historic District anyway, on Wood Street, but then it's not safe at all to walk on Fruit Street to get to the fields. So that would be a nice connector. People could go to the fields from the dog park.
Thanks, Amy.
Quick question to follow up on the earlier comment about trail maintenance during winter. If a trail's paved, is it maintained during winter? I just don't have enough experience around town. So I guess maybe John would know. Does the surface condition or the kind of trail specification permit it to be cleared in the winter months, unlike a sidewalk, which is always cleared?
Yeah, if I could answer that. We have roughly 35 miles of sidewalk in town. And the DPW, we only remove snow from about half of those miles of road of sidewalk. And that's purely the number of people that we have after a storm to be able to clear the sidewalk. So we don't clear all 35 miles. So you're asking if the trail were paved, would we then clear snow from that trail? Likely not. unless it were a prime connector for students getting to and from school, for example. But we don't do all of our existing sidewalks, much less any part of a trail network.
Good to know. I think that helps kind of the committee kind of frame that idea. Just being a sidewalk unto itself doesn't necessarily mean that it would be cleaned anyway.
Thanks, Joe. Good question. And thanks, John. Jane.
Sure. So not this last time we went before the school committee, but the time before, I want to say it was maybe in 2021, we had presented the concept of building the trail behind the new Marathon School, connecting through EMC Park to the school connector. And the conversation came up, should it be paved? And we had gone to Conservation Commission. They recommended, and we agreed, pervious pavement. And the reason being was that because so many kids, especially the high schoolers, use the EMC parking lots during certain times to get to the school, that they would be willing actually to plow the sidewalks if we were able to build that trail system through that property. So that's something to consider, because we have multiple options in our town that are willing to take into safety, connectivity, usability, safety factors for the kids in school and stuff like that. So there's a lot of other conversations that are going on out there.
Thanks, Jane. Ken.
Yeah, I would say section I there, if it were built, would surely be on the list of to be plowed sidewalks in town because it's so close to the school. So I think that makes sense to focus on that one. And I think the connection to Blueberry, I'm not sure whether Jay is what you spoke of before that's already at town meeting or more than or distinct from that, but that's obviously a highly useful link. The one in M, I think, is something that the Trails Coordinating Management Committee could handle all by itself, so long as permissions were obtained to connect it up to Legacy Farms North itself. I think that's just a permissions one. I don't think it needs any, hardly any money in order to accomplish a nice connection there. But I'm all in favor of it. I just think it's really a matter of getting permissions, and the infrastructure to make that happen, I think, is rather low. But I could be mistaken.
Yeah.
No, I
Thanks,
agree
Ken.
with you, Ken.
It's a good point. Trails and little connectors are a lot cheaper than sidewalks.
Yep.
And might be able to be done via other or funded by other means. Chuck.
A couple different areas. The area I, in the vicinity of the schools. The school roads, not town roads, but the sidewalks from the yellow post on the loop road up along the athletic fields and then up past the art center are a mess. That's where I think some money could be spent to make those much more feasible. At this point, when they plow it, they run ruts on either side. The roads are so narrow, or the sidewalks are so narrow. I mean, that's an area where there's existing infrastructure that could be improved until the so-called campus connector gets built, and frankly could supplant the purpose of the campus connector. On area F, there's certainly now an extensive network of trails in the Fruit Street property, far more than is shown on this map. But the F is in a location where there's water department land that could provide a good trail connection from North Street near the intersection with with Wood Street, out to Fruit Street, and then across into the town properties east of Fruit Street. So there's some real potential there for additional connectivity, more for recreational use probably than for commuting or getting to market. The location K is really part of the loop, the connection from the center school in the vicinity of L out to Ash Street. So all those areas are being connected now. There are trails, but they can be improved to enhance the whole network.
All right, thanks, Chuck. And I will say that K in particular was extending the sidewalk on Ash Street, just to get access to those trails that peel off of it. So that was the idea there.
Great.
And at the risk of sounding like a broken record, I don't want to get too hung up on the specific locations. I'm doing my best to kind of tease out themes. And I think what I'm hearing thus far is that in a lot of cases, the trails can potentially be built or funded through other means, whereas sidewalks, it seems like there's maybe a bit more interest from this group in prioritizing the sidewalks, because those are harder to find alternative means. So that's just kind of my synopsis so far. But Sam, I think you were next. Oh, you're muted, Sam.
Not a comment, but a question. What's the town ordinance for sidewalk clearing of snow? Is it the property owner's responsibility? Can anyone on the call answer that?
Yeah, the town of Hopkinton never accepted never put that ordinance into place where property owners are responsible for the sidewalks in front of their home.
Most places that I've lived prior have that requirement. So it might be something we might think about in the future if we're going to put more sidewalks, and John's department is limited. They can't clear everything. Make it the responsibility of the property owner to clear the sidewalk on their property.
We do have a bylaw preventing people from putting snow on the sidewalks, at least. But you're right. I've lived in other towns where you did have to remove the snow off your own sidewalk.
Sorry, John, you were going to say?
No, I was going to say that the challenge with that, and we had that in another community where I've worked, is that if you've got someone who is unable to clear the snow because they are either a senior, they are disabled, or they, for whatever reason, can't clear the snow, then you get into a situation where you're trying to enforce a bylaw on someone that doesn't have any way of clearing the snow. So that's one of the challenges that we would face if we were looking at such an ordinance.
Peter.
Yeah, just getting to back to your why question, Gary. Just want to say what I'm hearing is density. Density. I mean, obviously schools are key because density of users, but obviously over on the lake, if you look at this map, you can see that's sort of the darkest area. So I think, it seems like those density is kind of the key factor is why we should be focusing on certain areas over others. That's what I'm hearing from this group.
Yeah. Thanks, Peter. All right. I think I'm hoping that we'll go maybe another 15 or 20 minutes. I know it's great participation so far, and I appreciate it. This is super helpful for me. I'll also say this is at least my second night in a row with some lengthy meetings. So I would love to go see my family at some point. Planning board last night met till almost 11. So, all right. Next scenario. This idea of doing one big project, and we're going to go back to Main Street, which based on the discussion thus far, seems to be a pretty high priority. Versus, so if we could spend money on doing one big project, or we could do a whole bunch of little ones. And again, I don't want to get hung up in the specifics here, but just in a general sense, how do people feel about a single big project versus a whole bunch of little ones?
In this scenario, are the whole bunch of little ones put together the same value as the one big one? The same cost?
Let's assume yes.
Then I would look to how many people are being served from point A to point B. So it'd be difficult looking at segments I, J, K, H, and L to figure out how many people are served, but versus segment B. But that's what I would look at. That would be my criteria for evaluating that scenario.
Yeah. Goes back to Peter's observation and Sam as well, that it seems like density and potential users seem to be what drives prioritization here. Matthew.
Yeah, on how many people are served, I guess the other question is, do we also look at how the quality of life improvements of the different locations? If it's a shorter walk for people by a quarter mile or something like that, versus letting people walk to Price Chopper who are currently going through a much dangerous route. So I'm not sure if it's just the total number of people impacted that we'd want to look at versus the amount of the quality of life impact on how many people.
Rhea?
And I would recommend that option A or option 1 go to Oakhurst and to capture just a small section longer on the causeway to capture this neighborhood that keeps growing.
And if I could reply to that, Rhea, I've looked at that because you and I have had that conversation before, and I've looked at that causeway. The challenge there is that we can't go outside of the existing guardrail and the existing paved area. So if we were to place a sidewalk there, we'd have to look at what that would do to the through traffic, because we'd be taking up 65 feet of travel way for a sidewalk. So that'd be one of the challenges. That'd be one of the challenges that we'd have to look at. It
would calm the traffic coming down the hill that's bombing down at 60 miles an hour. That's what it would do, because you're making it a skinnier road. When I talked about the traffic under 495 and having stop signs, we might not have had those accidents coming out of Cumbies if the traffic had been pulsed going in the direction of the east, eastward. But because it's a yield instead of a stop sign, people were, coming together and still going very fast. So, these are some logical traffic things. The causeway I have seen in several cities where they've erected, a structure that is elevated on a causeway because you don't want to have something, going into the water resource. This big long project, one project versus small ones, this is one continuous project that's a straight line. It seems to be a lot easier to figure out for safety, whereas all these other ones are sort of like, okay, we can do this one here, we can do that one there, but they have the option of being a trail versus a sidewalk, or you have the option of it being a wannabe versus a have to be. That it's like apples to oranges to me in my head. I do believe there's a solution to the causeway, and it would be helpful.
Can I just throw out an idea though? And I'm just, as we look at the populations here, we could go by West Elm that runs parallel to the causeway, and it's a slightly longer route, but that would give access to those neighborhoods and avoid the causeway altogether. And I would argue, if I was out walking, if there was a sidewalk along the causeway, I wouldn't want to be on it anyways. I'd rather go a little further and go into a neighborhood that's away from the 50 mile per hour cars and trucks that are going by.
But you're not coming over here then, Gary, because you're not seeing the people trying to fish off the causeway. You're not seeing the people who are trying to walk to Price Chopper. I mean, I drive this road all the time. I mean, it is a busy road. There are people trying to bike and walk it, and it's a matter of time before there's an accident. I mean, there are accidents in West Main Street all the time. Don't get me wrong. But I'm just saying that a child, I mean, I see kids walking down the street, and if we just had a simple elevated sidewalk for that section of the causeway that would just take people off the road or try to narrow that road so that it slows the traffic down. These are two solutions. It's not an impossibility.
Right, Jane.
Sure. So I'm going to pick up on Ria's thread. I think safety is a big issue there, and it appears as though there are other funding sources that might be applicable to that corridor that may not be applicable to the smaller routes. The smaller routes may be looking for, different funding sources, but the larger projects, maybe we could qualify for DOT. So that's something to investigate. And I agree with Ria. If you narrow the road, the traffic will slow down. People don't like to hear that, but that's exactly what happens. And so I think the density does speak to the safety needs that are currently out there. We've got a big shopping area. We've got a big population down by the lake. And the east side is getting lots of attention. I think it's time for our community to look at the west side. Years and years ago, 495 came in and it divided our community. And it was very sad that we didn't buy into the fact, thoughts of connectivity back then. But now we're talking about it, and I don't think it's an impossible task. Is it going to be work? Yes, but I think we can do it.
All right. Thanks, Jane.
Thank you.
Any further thoughts on this? It sounds like, and again, it's hard to separate the project from the difference here, but certainly a lot of support for Main Street safe passage under 495 and potentially beyond. I hear that loud and clear. Okay, so those were the scenarios that I had. I do, I think we've already heard a couple of other suggestions for improvements. One being extending this potential segments across the causeway. I know in the comments we heard Holt Street. I'm just curious, again, this is just an early draft. Are there other locations that people feel would rise to a high priority for sidewalks? And again, I'm using that carefully. We hear Front Street, Saddle Hill, and there's lots of places where people walk and would like to walk more. But are there other locations that people think should be a high priority? And Ken, you raised your hand first, so go ahead.
The section that I'm thinking about is the part of Clinton Street right between Main Street and Legacy Farms South. A lot of people walk on that right now, and a lot of the people that have moved into Legacy Farms South actually take that loop of walking around on Main Street. It's a pretty good loop, except for the Clinton Street doesn't have a sidewalk. So it would probably require eminent domain for part of that, but a big hunk of that is open land on the east side where there's basically the leach fields for Legacy Farms. And that part would be, I think, pretty easy to have a little bit of enhancement to make it so they could stay out of the road for that. And that's about, I think it's about a third of the distance between Legacy Farms South and Main Street. So I'm just thinking easy picking side of it. Be nice to have it the whole way, but that'd be more expensive. But you know what I'm talking about, right? The fields, that's an open field. There's plenty of room. You wouldn't have to do anything hardly except for a little bit of infrastructure to make it easier for people to walk there.
Yeah. And Ken, to the discussion, that completes a loop as well, because you've got the sidewalk coming down to Clinton Street.
That's right.
And then through Legacy Farms. So I see your rationale there. Jane?
Sure. So this probably comes from my background, but any street that is used for a shortcut coming from other towns to get through to Hopkinton, to get to either 495 one way or to Ashland or the MDTA stations. Off the top of my head, it's Granite Street, Clinton Street, Elm Street, Spring Street, Lumber Street. They're all throughout all of town. So maybe if we did do a master plan, we could kind of identify some of those areas that are at high risk for to improve safety for cyclists and pedestrians.
Okay, thanks, Jane.
Yeah, that's a good point, Jane. I'd add Ash Street to that list as well.
Yep, Ash.
A lot of folks coming through there.
Yep.
And Front. And Mill.
Yep. But I think there's
Saddle.
value in the master plan.
There's a lot. I mean, that's I think the reality is any through
We
street,
can't do it all at once, but if we, it's
I was going to say, and Holt Street that cuts through from Ash.
Holt. Yep. There's another one.
A lot of kids.
Yeah,
Yep.
there's a lot.
It's a good discussion.
Yeah. All right. The last slide I have is just some questions that I'd love to get some perspective on. And we'll take as much or as little time as people want. Sidewalks are expensive. And, our current estimates are $170 per foot. And that includes design work. But, I'm just curious, and this group is obviously people that care about this and want to invest. But, what is a reasonable amount for us to spend here? And is it, $500,000 a year, $1 million a year, $2 million a year? And I realize those are just sort of big numbers, but I'd love to get some sense as to trying to get some guidance for what people think is a reasonable request to bring to future town meetings. Rhea. You're muted, Rhea.
I think we're talking about two different things, though, because the connectivity for people to do, walking in a field to get from one point to another is way different than the sidewalk for safety. Yes, and it's connectivity, but it's also it's a safety issue that is an investment for the long haul. I mean, I think we have to look at trying to separate these a little bit, because it's like they're way different in costs. Just a thought.
Yeah. Well, and again, this just stems from, what we don't want to do is we don't want to bring things to town meeting that, Amy made the point earlier. We know we've got a lot of financial pressure, and, just a ballpark number, a sidewalk along Main Street under 495 is going to be a couple of $1 million to extend an elevated walkway that runs along the causeway is going to be a couple $1 million more. The costs are substantial, and don't get me wrong, we can't put a price on people's safety, but at the end of the day, I think that we have to think about. I'm trying to get some sense as to, this year, for example, we have $600,000. Almost $700,000 in sidewalks, and one of those along Chestnut is a place that has seen children hit in the past. So is that a reasonable request? Should we be more aggressive, and should we be going after more? Should we be going after bigger projects? But the limiter here is consistently going to be cost. Peter.
One, I think, consideration again from this group is, Jane mentioned earlier, a place for sidewalks is some of those areas that are used by neighboring towns as connectors. So Spring Street, Front Street. And I think while that's important, I think the hearing Halt Street, balancing those two where you're getting kids walking to school, Halt Street to me would be a much higher priority. And the other similar one is that little bit of Grove Street, from Pleasant Street to Grove Street. There's half a block that doesn't have a sidewalk. If you put a sidewalk in there and, at $170 a foot, that's probably not even a huge amount of money, but you could get rid of the crossing guard at Pleasant Street and Grove. So
I haven't even been able to hire a crossing guard the last 2 years. So.
Yeah, but they need one. But anyway, I mean, there's some. I think this is kind of all distilling to. There's, I think, some low-hanging fruit, things that have huge value. The other thing I wanted to say with respect to number 2 here, something to think about, and Chuck Joseph pointed it out to me. One of the things that makes the Chestnut Street sidewalk so valuable is a lot of people drive their kids to school in the morning and then they're at work, and then their kids can then walk home, on nice days. Halt sort of falls into that same category where someone can get driven to school, but then the kids are going to be walking in the afternoon. It frees up that option, which decreases the need for cars on the road. So I think that's another thing, is to improve that connectivity for walkers, decreases the number of cars necessary on the road.
All right, thanks, Peter. I want to go back to the cost piece, because what I heard previously was Main Street under 495 top priority, even though it's expensive. And then I also hear some comments about, well, maybe we can pick off some of these less expensive ones along the way. And reality is it's probably a combination of both, but I'd love to just hear someone's perspective. What is a reasonable ask for dollars at town meeting? And I want, certainly there's other funding sources and we will plan to pursue those, but what do people think is an appropriate number to bring to town meeting for sidewalks that improve safety?
I think for me, if we're going to have to fund it all ourselves, if there's no grants available for it, I wouldn't want to do more than $500,000 a year. But those big ones, like under 495, is really valuable. But I think we should really pursue grant funding for those, because there'll be millions, I think.
So, Gary, if you look back at the map that was put together for discussions with our legislators, it's actually got the measurement of length, approximate length, times that $170 per foot. So the section under 495, that came in at $800,000. So still a big number, but I just wanted to let folks know.
But to the point earlier, John, I would assume that the complexities with the interchange and DOT approval or DOT involvement there and other traffic mitigation, I'm just assuming that one's going to cost more than $170 a foot. There's going to be a lot more design cost and likely more construction costs as well. Is that a incorrect assumption?
No, that's a fair assumption. That might bring us up. It might add another 200,000 maximum. So we might be approaching $1 million there.
Well, that would be a pretty easy sell for me. I was thinking it would be 2 to 3 times that. So if that's, again, I realize this is preliminary and just back of the envelope, but that's a good sign to hear. Ken.
Well, as longtime advocate for the Upper Charles Trail, I nonetheless think that the bigger money ought to be spent along the sidewalks. And I'm all in favor of building the Upper Charles Trail, but I think it ought to cost as little as possible to get as much as we can get for the work. So I know that's not really answering your question about dollars at town meeting, but of course, things aren't always equal, and sometimes you can get granting opportunities to build a trail system like Upper Charles Trail that you couldn't get for the sidewalks, I suppose, and that sways the equation. But if it weren't for that, I'd be thinking public money ought to all go for the sidewalks for the dollar amounts and lower amounts to build the trail system like the Upper Charles Trail that would be suitable for most people using like a stone dust path to do that, which need not cost so much. That's my way of thinking about it.
Thanks, Ken. Sam?
Yeah, just from listening to the conversation and being a 25, 27, 28-year resident of Hopkinton now, I think my perspective is that it would be easier to get buy-in from the town, the residents, if we had a multi-year plan and they could see where that plan was going and what's the final result. And they say, okay, we're going to have a 5-year, 8-year, 10-year, whatever plan to make Hopkinton more accessible for walking, safer for people to travel around town. Here's the various segments, and then go back every year for the same amount of money and get it built into the budget. And of course, to sell that, you would have to do what you're doing tonight, do more public meetings, get residents from the different neighborhoods together. So when it came up for a vote, they would vote yes on it.
Yeah, Sam, that's exactly why we're here. And I don't know if you missed the beginning, but that's why we're doing this, is to put that multi-year plan together.
Yep. Yeah, I think that would be the easier way to sell it than coming 1 year with a big request, nothing the next year, and then coming back with another request.
Yeah.
Gary?
So,
Sam, that's a great point. One little quick nuance to that is if we are going to show multi-year planning and budgeting, showing some factors of cost increase, I don't think we could have the same budget year over year with changing costs, expenses.
That's a good point, Joe.
Just one
Jane?
last point. Yeah, so I agree with Joe and the others. I think we're going at it a little backwards. I think we have to, although these, for this year, we can certainly propose some costs, but I think after that, we have to look at the benefits of using a master plan and finding out what the priorities are throughout town, finding out what the cost structures are, what the funding could be for these various projects, and present it to the town citizens that way.
Yep. All we need is time.
Yeah. Not going anywhere.
And I agree with you, though. And I think, that's why we're doing this. And, again, my one caution is, again, for everyone is it's easy to get to think about what we benefit from. And that's where I really like the mindset of density and users, because, and we all know that if things are perceived to benefit only a small portion of the community, they tend to not pass a town meeting. So I think that's where the master plan and density and usability and showcasing how these recommendations enhance the broader town, I think, is really, really important. I just have two last questions for the group, but I'm curious if people have thoughts on this question of what are characteristics of a good sidewalk? What's a sidewalk that people really like? What are the characteristics of a bad sidewalk, or one that people, maybe the answer there is no sidewalk, but I'm just kind of curious to hear thoughts on it. I have strong opinions on this, but I want to hear from other people. What makes a good sidewalk? What makes a bad sidewalk?
I can talk quick on that. Not that I have experience around here, but sometimes you see paved sidewalks that start getting mounded or big kind of elevation changes around stumps and roots, and they become hard to navigate. I think when we think about our population on wheelchairs or walkers or carriages, kids on bikes and scooters, that becomes a problem unto itself. So smooth and planar, I think, is important.
Thanks, Joe. Other thoughts? I'll just throw one out there just to get people thinking. I really don't love sidewalks that are right up against a high-speed road. I will use them, and it's certainly better than working on the road, but boy, I don't feel safe if I'm with my kids. I don't feel safe for my kids, and I don't enjoy it as much. And I walk along the Main Street sidewalk almost every Sunday, and I am eager to have Chuck, to have an option that at least goes through Berry Acres, that I can get off the road. So that's just me, my opinion. Ken?
Yeah, I was pretty much trying to convey that with my chat about skin crawling. So the way I tell about a bad sidewalk is one that makes me uncomfortable to be on it. And it's the reason that I'd be uncomfortable is for the reason you cite, that if there's high-speed traffic real close to it. And so it's not so bad if the sidewalk's a little farther from the road, but if it's right up against a high-speed road, then I don't find it very pleasant to be on it. Now, it's still the case, though, that it's a lot better to be on the sidewalk than to be right on the shoulder of the road.
Yes.
So, that's not an argument against sidewalks, but the best ones are those that are comfortable to be on.
And I think one other point to make too is East Main Street is an example where the barrier is between the sidewalk and the road. I actually think that's a really, really nice improvement. And despite the fact that you still might have high-speed traffic going by you, it feels a whole lot safer to have a barrier between the sidewalk and the road. So, and I think just as we think about Main Street under 495, that might also be a way to help improve safety and help people feel more comfortable, is by actually having some kind of barrier between the sidewalk and the road itself. Ria.
Hi, I kind of misunderstood your question because I was thinking about the design of the sidewalk, and if possible, and similar cost, permeable pavement of some sort, especially near natural resources. Again, to allow runoff to percolate and clean itself before it hits any kind of a water body. There's a lot of roads in town, scenic roads in town, that it's hard to imagine putting a sidewalk in, because what makes them a scenic road is the fact that they don't have a sidewalk there. But that's my 2 cents. I would prefer to see some permeable pavement versus the hard concrete or asphalt.
Yeah.
And when we see the bike trail, I want to say in Holliston, where it goes to that crushed bluestone, that's turned out to be pretty successful. It doesn't, the roots of the trees aren't trying to pop through it. It's they're getting water, so they're not trying to go to the surface to get the water. There is still maintenance to it, but it's a different kind of maintenance than replacing big chunks of it, every 10 years when the roots pop through.
Yeah. Jane.
Sure. So the challenge with the Holliston Trail and other stone dust trails is that it's not usable all throughout the year. Whenever there's inclement weather or heavy rainstorms or whatever, I was over trying to use the Holliston Trail the other day, and it was when it was raining and it was just all washed out. I had to get off my bike and I couldn't walk. I couldn't ride the bike. So permeable asphalt has its advantages, for a lot of reasons.
So I think we're probably pretty close to wrapping up. Number one, I just want to say thank you to everyone for taking almost 2 hours out of their evening. I am really, really happy with how this discussion went. This is a small sample size, but I think the conversation really contextualized a couple of things for me. And without a doubt, I'm hearing from this group that Main Street under 495 is without a doubt a top priority. And so, I think candidly, I think it's hard pressed to argue against that. So, but I think in general, just hearing the other conversations and considerations, we still have a lot of work to do here, but sounds like there's generally good support for building out a more comprehensive plan over multiple years, of prioritizing some things, of tucking in these small wins when we can get them, of really prioritizing grant money. And in some of these simpler trail connectivity, there's likely some other groups that can take some of that on as well. So that's just kind of a quick snapshot from my end. My closing thought is, we all know from, the natural, if you build it, they will come. But I really, really believe that with sidewalks and trails. I think it's an asset that a broad cross-section of our community can use. And I'd say, just as an example, if you look at the Spine Road over on Legacy, that is one of the most highly traveled pedestrian areas in Hopkinton. And, that exists because, the town pushed for it. So, to me, I always argue there's no such thing as a trail or a sidewalk I don't like. But I think my ask for everyone here is to be an advocate for this, to come to town meeting, to get your friends and family on board with this. It's not going to be a perfect process. There's going to be resistance. I know people don't even like it when a part of the right of way in front of their house is sometimes converted to a sidewalk. So it's not that we're not going to hit resistance, but from a community perspective, I think we're all in agreement that this can be a tremendous asset. So on that note, I'm going to close, but special thanks to our town staff, John and Elaine, to HCAM for recording it. I think that this is hopefully a session that more folks will listen to, and to everyone that was able to and willing to share their perspective on it. So thank you all. Appreciate it. More to come. And if you want to be involved and help out with this, you can send me an email. My address is, it's the planning board one. You can get it on the town website. But by all means, we're happy to have help as we work through this. So thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Nice job. Thank you very much.
Great meeting. Good night.
Good night.